succeed against Tracy Mann. I'm very pleased to be with you today. I don't write my speeches down in advance. I just kind of open up and talk from the heart, and that's what I'd like to do to introduce myself. So it's important for me to point out the one thing that no Kansas politician is ever supposed to admit, which is that I wasn't born in Kansas. I was born in Texas on the other end of the Ogallala Aquifer, so I grew up with the same water issues we're still facing today, being taught that this is going to go away one day, and now we're finally facing that. I worked around the country as a trial lawyer, mostly defending family businesses, suing hedge funds and banks for fraud, and then eventually met my wife up in Chicago. I learned something important, which is that some things are more important than money. And I quit my job with a law firm to follow her around the country for her scientific career, which eventually took us to Kansas because she's a superstar in her field and we could go pretty much anywhere in the country we wanted to go. And we drove down Massachusetts Street in Lawrence and we realized this is where we want to raise our family. So we moved to Lawrence, we had our kid. He's coming up on 9 years old now, and we are Kansans at heart and have been, we realized, our entire lives. I had never thought about politics much, at least in an organized fashion, never intended to be a candidate until a little over a year ago. I was in Oakley, Kansas, watching Roger Marshall turn his back on his constituents. If you watch the footage of that day, it was probably the footage I took. I just happened to be standing there recording on my cell phone and put it on my Facebook page. I've got some journalist friends, and it went out through them, I think, and went around to CNN and the New York Times. And on the 5-hour drive back to Lawrence, I got some calls from some journalists around the country asking, how is this possible? How could anybody be this incompetent and this weak as a national politician? And what I kept telling them over and over again was, this is what a safe seat does. Roger Marshall doesn't have any need to respect his constituents because he expects their votes no matter what. So why would he stand there and take disrespect from them? And I thought for a couple of weeks about running against Roger Marshall, and then eventually took a hard look at the budget for a Senate campaign and realized that's just not realistic. But we have the same problem, and it doesn't get as much attention on the House level. Tracy Mann is the same. Tracy Mann has the same weakness, has the same safe seat, and the same disease. And he's just a little bit smarter than Roger Marshall. He just doesn't have the town hall in the first place, so he doesn't have to run away, and he still doesn't have to deal with disrespectful questions from his constituents. What we need is to run that campaign in a very strategic way. I realized early on we needed to run this race in a way that we were doing the job, whether we win the seat or not. We need to run the campaign in a way that leaves behind a mechanism and a machine to make it easier for the next candidate, whether it's me or somebody else, and the next candidate after that, and the next candidate after that. Because the goal here, the strategic objective, is not to put me in Congress. The objective is to flip the first district and make it competitive again. And we do that with a multi-year strategy, and we run a campaign according to that strategy. There's nobody running at the time. I was the first candidate to get into the race, and I looked hard at what was available, the resources we had, and realized this is doable. This is a winnable race. That was last summer, and winnable was optimistic last summer. But in the years since then, Donald Trump has been working hard every single day to prove to America why it's important to vote for Democrats. Nobody is working harder to elect me to office than Donald Trump is, with Tracy Mann maybe a close second, showing why we need candidates who care about ethics in government, why we should care about corruption, why we should care about free trade policies, why we should care about wars in foreign countries, because they live at home on the kitchen table. These are issues that matter to us at home. And now as I'm traveling the district, I talk to farmers who tell me they're still Trump people. That's not going to change in this next year, but they're not Tracy Mann people, because honestly, who is? Who would be? There's a weakness in the Republican Party, especially at that district level, that we can exploit this year. We have an opportunity to achieve something historic, which is to flip the first district. And as long as we run a careful, strategic campaign, it's a campaign that wins whether or not I go to Congress. Because the point, again, is to make the district competitive. That's the strategy we're running. It's why we're running it in the way that we are. And it's the year to accomplish it in a year that hasn't been possible, in a way that hasn't been possible for many, many years at this point. I'm very grateful for the chance to talk to you. Looking forward to answering your questions. And thank you so much for the opportunity.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for getting up early on a Saturday morning and coming down when you could be doing fun festivities and things like that. I'm Lauren Reinhold. I'm a single mom, a lawyer of 29 years, and until last year I was a proud public servant at the Social Security Administration. My entire life and career has been dedicated to serving others' interests, from raising 2 children to fighting for immigrants, disabled Americans, and other poor and underserved populations through my practice of law. At the Social Security Administration, I worked hard to make sure that disability benefits were adjudicated properly, and then later on to make sure that trained and competent people were handling your Social Security benefits. Last year, when my job was caught in the Doge cuts, I had to make a decision what to do next. And I realized that what I wanted to do was to continue to serve. And I realized that my experience and career had given me the knowledge and insight to represent us in the U.S. House of Representatives and Congress. The 1st Congressional District deserves a public servant representing us in Washington, and Tracy Mann is not that public servant, not by a long shot. Instead, Tracy Mann has shown us that he is nothing more than a partisan stooge and a rubber stamp to an executive branch that is out of control. I believe Kansans care. I believe Kansans care more about excellent schools in our communities than we do about building an opulent ballroom in the White House or making sure the reflecting pool is blue. So when I'm your representative, I will demand that the federal government do its part to fund our schools so that community schools stay open, educators keep their jobs, and all of our children have an excellent education. I believe Kansans care more about quality, accessible healthcare than they care about coming in between a doctor and a patient. So when I'm your representative, I will be a steadfast supporter of policies and bills that ensure expanded Medicaid coverage and a return of the ACA tax credits, as well as adding a public option so that all Kansans and all Americans can be insured. These steps are necessary to ensure that we can all afford to see a doctor, thereby increasing the revenue that hospitals and clinics receive to help keep our hospitals and clinics open and functioning. I believe that Kansans care more about well-constructed and well-maintained roads and bridges than we care about spending a fortune bombing Iran. So when I'm your representative, I will propose a rural New Deal aimed at expanding, modernizing, and maintaining rural infrastructure for a new American century. A rural New Deal would build new roads and bridges to connect communities, grow our passenger rail network, maintain water and utility systems, shore up community structures, and establish stable and reliable broadband so all our communities can thrive. I believe that Kansas is ready for a change. I believe Kansas wants a change, and I believe I can be that change. I believe that Kansans throughout towns in the Big First, from Liberal to Lawrence to Larned to Lindsborg to Lucas, all in the district, that's all in our district, folks, have more in common than we don't. We share more of the same concerns, hopes, and dreams for tomorrow than we don't. By focusing on our common interests, we can find solutions that are workable for everyone, and we can have leadership that serves the people instead of leadership that serves a party and corporate interests. I really look forward to hearing questions from you all today and talking to everyone. Thank you.
Do you mind if I step this forward? Do you mind?
Oh, no, yeah, that's
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
Are you good? Okay.
Okay, are we set? Good.
Yeah.
We're going to start with this first question is for Mr. McRoberts, and it is regarding the economy and some corporate energy demands. And basically, we're going to start with the explosion of AI and data centers has the potential of increasing, massively increasing electricity demand. How exactly should the cost of upgrading the power grid be paid for? Should the financial burden fall primarily on the tech corporations building these data centers, the utility companies, or the taxpayers?
That's a very easy question, to be honest. It should fall solely on the people taking the economic benefit from those centers, which is the companies that are building them in the first place. which may not be the tech company itself. They may be subcontracting out in some cases to middlemen, but in that case, the burden needs to fall on the operator of the center. And the reason for that isn't just the obvious, commercial reality of the person using the power should be the person paying for the power. It's also that we need these to be stable businesses, and right now they are not stable businesses. If you look at the economic statistics right now, the reason the economy is not in a tailspin is largely only because of the investment going into AI and data centers. And the tech companies are telling us that's fine because we will eventually see actual productivity coming out of AI. It's going to reward all that investment. But right now, this is a hugely leveraged sector of the economy, meaning this is being funded by borrowing. And those loans will come due one day. And the more those data centers are built on somebody else's back, the more they're being put onto the taxpayers who are building the center locally, the more it's going into, giveaways by local communities trying to draw in the data centers, the more that leverage is being offloaded from the companies who are making money off of the AI, and the more it's being put onto somebody else. That risk isn't being carried by the people who are benefiting from that risk, which gives them negative incentives. They no longer have an incentive to tailor their economic activity to what's actually productive and efficient and safe. Now they have incentive to hit the gas as fast as humanly possible, because once they hit the wall, they expect somebody else to go squish first. That's incredibly risky. That's one of the things that caused the dot-com bust. It's one of the things that caused the real estate bust in 2007. And we are smart enough, I hope, to learn a lesson from those disasters and say, right now, we need to do what we can to restrain that leverage, restrain that spending on AI. The concern has always been, but China will get there ahead of us. Well, they might. That's not the end of the world. But if we let the leverage go unchecked, if we let these data centers become economic centers for most of the country, we run the risk that we get there before China, but there is a huge economic crash. It's more important we be strategic and tactical about this. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Reinhold, your rebuttal?
Yes, I don't really have anything to rebut too much in a way of disagreement, but because I agree with Colin that we need to make sure that the companies, whoever they are, that benefit are the ones that pay for the upgrades. By the same token, those companies need to figure out how they're going to get water if they need it. I'm very concerned about that. And what I'm noticing about AI is that it's almost become a runaway train. The issue with AI itself and with the data centers, with these data centers. I mean, if we were to have a moratorium on building them so that we could more thoughtfully look at these issues for local communities, that would have needed to be done yesterday. Really, it's too late probably for a federal moratorium. I would still vote for one if that were put before me, but it's really such a local issue, and I'm hearing of so many local communities that are just having to fight so hard and have so little control. What I'm also noticing that's very troublesome, so I just encourage everybody in your local community, if you have a data center issue come up, get as much information as you can, because what I'm finding is the local councils are hiding information from the public about how these data centers are truly going to work.
Okay. Ms. Reinhold, this next question will be for you.
Okay.
Shifting focus a little bit, Democrats have noticeably faced shifting demographics, and there's been some ground lost among some bedrock constituencies. Okay, so to build a durable majority, how do you plan to win back Democratic voters?
The main way I plan to win back Democratic voters is, like I said in my opening, focus on those common issues and not focus on these issues that Lawrence is solely interested in, or that urban communities would be interested in. To focus on what the people need, what all of us need in rural America, which is better infrastructure, reliable schools, reliable roads, and stay away from those issues that are divisive, because that's what the Republicans want. They want us to fight over divisive issues. That's why they spent half of the their time in the Kansas legislature this year enacting a bathroom bill just so they could see us fight with each other. And we absolutely have to unite. And I realize that the Democratic Party is at a disadvantage with this. And one main reason is the attitude that the National Party has had towards rural America. A few years ago, Chuck Schumer said for every Democrat we lose in rural areas, we'll gain 2 in the city. How has that gone for them? And they have abandoned rural America. And the more I learn about it, the more I understand how deeply that's happened, the more really infuriated I become, but also determined that progressive principles, that we find a way to focus on common principles, not even gonna call them progressive principles. There's nothing progressive about making sure our communities function, really. It's not radical by any means. Focus on the basics and focus on what we all need.
Mr. McRoberts, your response?
Thank you very much. I think that's a very long-term plan to do the same thing the Democratic Party has been doing for the last 10 years with pretty disastrous results. The Democratic Party has approval ratings that are almost as much in the toilet as Donald Trump's approval ratings are. And one of the reasons is people hear us talking about the catastrophe, the disaster, the risk, the danger, the harm, but they don't see Democrats accomplishing anything. And so if our promise is we will one day accomplish better schools for you, that is too soft and it's too ill-formed to be something that can actually attract those marginal voters. And we have to attract those marginal voters. There are simply not enough Democrats in the 1st District to win an election. We've got to build a coalition with independents and even swingable Republicans. But what independents and swingable Republicans want to see is not someone trying to come to the middle on the same terms and the same policies as Republicans. They already have a Republican on the ballot who doesn't talk about controversial issues. His name is Tracy Mann, and he never talks about anything. And so if they want to put their mind into this, I've got a Republican who's not too bad mindset, he's there for them as kind of a generic candidate. What we do instead is we identify specific things we do that will succeed, that will actually make a difference in their lives on a short-term basis. For example, ending the tariffs. We run on free trade, we run on business, we run on revitalizing the economy, and we run on anti-corruption. We run on accountability for corruption and incompetence in government, and we define ourselves that way to rehabilitate the image and the energy behind the Democratic Party and build that coalition with independents and Republicans. Thank you.
Okay, and staying with you and staying on this particular topic, this concerns voting rights, and battles over congressional maps are still continuing. What specific federal legislation will you champion to combat gerrymandering, voter suppression, and how will you protect the right to vote?
Fantastic question. So I am blessed with a large network of people doing fascinating jobs. An old friend of mine from high school now helps run the MIT election lab, where they're doing a lot of the data work on what makes a fair election and how do you keep elections fair. And I talked to him a while back and asked him, what is the single best thing we could do to protect elections at the congressional level? What policy should Congress enact very specifically, other than just saying everybody should be allowed to vote? And his answer was immediate, and he said, you've got to make sure that you are restricting the ability of states to gerrymander. And it's not complicated. It is simply banning gerrymandering and requiring the use of either bipartisan or nonpartisan commissions. You let states choose, so they've got some freedom to choose whether they want to completely eliminate the parties' roles or bring in multiple parties to do it, but you require that, and there are specific steps you can add on to that, requiring certain cracking and packing statistics to try and make sure they're as fair as possible. There is no single metric that tells you this district is fairly drawn, but you adopt something that is close enough, and that gives everyone a target to hit, and that gives the states a reasonable path to actually drawing fair districts. Beyond that, you make Election Day a national holiday, you encourage even private businesses to follow it, and you establish this moral principle that voting is the right thing to do, a thing to defend, a thing to stand up behind. Democrats have been pretty good about that. We've defined ourselves the party that wants voting, wants voters, and we just have to make sure we're not collapsing to the kind of pressure from that kind of Republican screaming machine that you've got to be afraid of voting, afraid of work, afraid of the elections. And we resist the conspiracy theories. I've seen a few even coming out about Donald Trump's last win. We resist that. No, elections are elections. The results are reliable. We support candidates like Jen Day, who are out there making sure people understand their elections are safe and fair. And we do what we can on the congressional level to force fair districts and to encourage voting through those softer policies, like making Election Day a national holiday.
Yes, so once again, not really much I disagree with there, or anything I disagree with there. Yeah, Congress needs to weigh in absolutely and legislate that we have fair maps drawn. And it's not too hard to figure out how. What are fair maps? There's a little bit of, from all of us, we know it when we see it. And you see this map, actually I have the map with me. We know it when we see it, not. This is the epitome of gerrymandering, this particular district that we're dealing with. And they've done that to divide us. And it's worked in a lot of ways, and that's what we're fighting against. But absolutely every state needs to have fair maps, have the lines drawn in a reasonable way. And I will say too that I know that Colin has talked about expanding the size of Congress. I'm not fundamentally opposed to that on a theoretical level, but I've read some things that say that it could actually, if gerrymandering is not fixed first, if we don't move to nonpartisan redistricting for all states, that could actually worsen if the size of Congress were expanded before this issue were tackled, before the gerrymandering issue were tackled. And also there is the cost associated with that. But I also agree with Colin that, you know, we need to have Election Day holidays, more free and fair open elections.
Okay, shifting gears. This is in regards to healthcare and inflation. Working families are still being hurt by healthcare inflation and medical debt. Would you bypass the status quo and support a universal or single-payer healthcare system to guarantee care regardless of employment?
Yes, I think universal healthcare, single-payer system is the ultimate goal, but I think in the meantime, we need to create an affordable public option, along with reestablishing, you know, expanding Medicaid, both on the state level. I know that's not in Congress's control, but taking away what they took in the big ugly bill, putting back what they took away in the big ugly bill, and the ACA tax credits, and then create a public option that is affordable for everyone. It is going to be an expense, absolutely. We're going to have to find money for it, but everyone should have the chance to buy health insurance at an affordable cost. Because what that will do is put downward pressure on the market with the private insurers that are focusing on profits and just ballooning their costs with health insurance. And I'll tell you personally, I feel it myself. I'm paying COBRA from my federal job, $2,500 a month for me and 2 adult children. And we can't go on like this, and we need everyone to have an option to be insured. The problem with jumping straight into a universal plan. I mean, I love the idea of it personally, but the problem with it is we're not gonna have the buy-in we need around the country to do that, especially in the red districts, especially in our district. We wouldn't have buy-in for that because there are too many people who do have good insurance with their employers and like it, especially our union workers. So I think we need to do this in an incremental way. The other reason why I would say don't jump right into universal health care is we have 2 more years after Colin or I are elected to replace Tracy Mann, 2 more years of a Republican administration where nothing major like that would pass.
So I agree that a single payer system is the ideal. And I met recently with a former CEO of one of our hospital systems here in the state, and he was giving me advice on healthcare. And I expected his advice would be against it because he's a former hospital CEO, firmly for it, enthusiastically for it, just doesn't think it's possible to accomplish in the United States. His proposal instead was reducing the age of eligibility for Medicare, and expanding Medicaid as well. Fantastic policies. My concern when we take these incremental steps towards it is the failure that happened with the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act was extremely carefully constructed. It was a brilliant idea, and as initially implemented, would likely have succeeded extremely well, but when they passed it, they didn't get the buy-in they needed, specifically from the GOP. And we live in the world we live in. It is not enough to say this policy would be extremely effective if the GOP wasn't kicking holes in it. They're kicking holes in it, and we have to acknowledge and live in that reality. So as we design these policies to step forward, they will fail unless either the Democratic Party has firm control, long-term control of Congress and the courts, or we get that buy-in specifically from the GOP. And so this policy has to begin with building that bridge, and that begins, I think, in the business community, because it's businesses who are seeing those healthcare costs spike. They see it much more directly than many individuals do, and that's the leverage we have over the GOP through those business donors and those business supporters to be able to say, no, there is an immediate need for a solution, and you have nothing on the table. It's the business communities, the chambers of commerce who are allies in that particular conversation. Thank you.
Okay, shifting gears again. Climate action versus economic reality. Okay, Democrats have pushed aggressively for a transition to renewable energy. How will you balance ambitious climate goals with the immediate economic realities of your district, such as high gasoline prices, particularly when it comes to preserving jobs and managing energy costs for all households?
So for context, I am very much a business guy. I didn't mention in my initial discussion, that's what I do for a living. I teach business at the University of Kansas, business law, business, negotiation. I'm very firmly in favor of business. And in the first district, that business is agriculture, and it's largely extractive. You drive to Great Bend, you're gonna pass a lot of wells and a lot of storage facilities, because that is where a lot of money in the district comes from. And that's fine. That's not gonna change in the short term, it's not gonna change in the medium term, it's not even gonna change in the long term. But we have a lot of work to do to rebuild that renewable energy infrastructure, especially in districts like the first district, because there's a huge value here that's not being captured. We see a lot of opposition to things like windmills, even things like nuclear power, and we have to overcome that piece by piece. And the way we overcome it is by making sure that it's commercially viable. We can't dictate the construction of alternative energy. We can't make it happen. What we can do is reduce the barriers to it and make sure that it's a way for the first district to be making money on some of the land and some of the facilities we have available. And one of the things we should be doing as the first district is openly doing outreach to, for example, nuclear generators, working to make ourselves more attractive to nuclear operators who want to build reactors in communities like ours, because that is clean energy and it's a way to build towards a more renewable future. Nuclear power isn't strictly renewable, but it's a damn sight better than natural gas power, for example, which is what's running a lot of data centers today. In the short term, we reopen the Straits of Hormuz. We do better negotiations, better trade deals and tariffs, and that resolves a lot of the energy concerns on a relatively short-term basis and gives us an economic step forwards into rebuilding that renewable capacity.
Yeah, I've noticed some areas here have a lot of wind. I'm not seeing much solar, but we have the land for it. I know that there are concerns with corporations coming in and not fulfilling promises. And I think that's one main thing we need to get buy-in from landowners and communities, is to know from the wind operators that they will maintain those structures. I've heard some concern that if wind comes in and then things are broken down in 30 years, are they just eyesores? And the same thing with solar. But we're also seeing a really big shift with the cost of gas, with the dryness out here, that, you know, agriculture is hurting. And I think if we can use the land in ways to generate clean energy and help income for, you know, our landowners, I think it's really important we do so. And, you know, and I'll say, the last thing I'll say is like, really now is the time to do that. Because we're seeing these gas prices spike. We're seeing crops dry up, and things aren't like they used to be, and landowners need to turn to another source of income.
Okay, we come to the last question. President Trump did not consult Congress before going to war with Iran. Should he be given a blank check from Congress to continue this war? And if so, should the U.S. put boots on the ground in Iran?
So I'm gonna say no to both of those questions, resoundingly no. First of all, Congress unfortunately has already given a blank check by not pushing back on this war. And it's not too late to push back and demand that he withdraw. Unfortunately, we have Congress people like our Congressman Tracy Mann who won't push back on anything that Trump does. And this is really a travesty. And I'd say, that's why I'm in this race, because we have a congressperson who is doing nothing, and a big part of the problem with Congress simply not doing its job. It's interesting because a lot of Republicans like to talk about the Constitution and how important the Constitution is. They seem to forget about separation of powers because they don't want their 1/3 power, apparently. So, and should we go into Iran? With ground troops? Absolutely not. That will be disastrous. This is already a war that was ill-informed, ill-conceived, directed by Israel, and there's no exit strategy, and experts who have weighed in on what's being done. Some of them are experts who have been in the Department of Defense and conducted, intense studies of the situation in Iran over the years. And they'll tell you, this strategy was one that they ruled out, and there's a reason for it, because they knew exactly what was going to happen. They've taken control of the strait, and Iran might end up better than they were before.
So when she refers to experts, in one sense, that's me. I mentioned earlier I teach at the University of Kansas. One of the things I teach is negotiation. I've spent about 10, 15 years traveling the world, teaching negotiators, advising on strategy, working in some of the most difficult negotiations imaginable. I've worked in 24, 25 countries around the world. My concern about immediately defunding the war in Iran is that if we do that, we make it almost impossible for the relatively few professional negotiators left in the State Department to effectively negotiate an end to hostilities. She's absolutely right, the war was incredibly stupid, poorly managed, run by an alcoholic Secretary of Defense who is more concerned about going on the media than actually doing a competent job administering a war. It's no surprise it's been a disaster, but it is what it is. And at this point, if we immediately defund the war, it has the potential to make it impossible to negotiate a solution in which Iran is not continuing in control of the Straits of Hormuz, which would be a long-term disaster for security in the region, not just for the United States, but for all of our allies. We would be seriously damaging our international standing by resulting in something like that. That does not mean I support ongoing hostilities, of course, and certainly not boots on the ground, but the solution has to be a much more careful and much more aggressive push for a renewal of Congress's role in authorizing the use of force in the first place. That's going to take, again, some bipartisanship, and it's going to take a Congress that is not a servant Congress as we have today, that sees itself as simply enabling Donald Trump's worst impulses. But it's going to take a much more aggressive push to what is the structural response and what is the role Congress has in authorizing these actions, as opposed to simply a point response to this individual offense. Thank you.
This concludes my interrogatories. I yield back to Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mike Gilmore.